Hi, everybody. At the beginning of the movie, a man lifts the skirt of an enslaved woman with a smug smile, then turns to his sister and says that this woman looks strong enough to handle hard work. He even calls his sister over, asking her to touch the woman's leg to feel how firm it is. The woman, trapped in her fate, can only stay silent, afraid to show any resistance, unexpectedly. The young lady doesn't take interest in her, but instead sets her eyes on the woman's daughter standing behind her when the mother realizes that they want to take her child. Her heart instantly sinks. She rushes forward, pleading desperately, saying she is willing to do anything as long as they leave her daughter behind, but in the eyes of those with power, her plea means nothing when they try to take the child away. The mother's instinct drives her to stop them, yet one stern shout freezes her in place. She knows too well that her life holds little value in their eyes, and pushing further would only bring disaster. Helplessly, she can only watch as her daughter is taken away. The girl brought back to the state cries endlessly. The lady of the house, Caroline, coldly tells her that her mother has been sent away, warning her to stop crying and focus on her duties, but outside the fence, the mother watches in tears, her heart breaking. A servant quietly urges her to leave, whispering that if she's caught, nothing can save her. Later, Caroline gives the girl a new name, July. Unlike the others, Caroline doesn't make her do heavy labor. Instead, she teaches her to read and write. Hoping July will grow into a graceful and well-mannered young woman as July grows up, the memory of being separated from her mother never fades, and a silent anger burns within her. Whenever Caroline calls her, July pretends not to hear. When folding Caroline's clothes or washing them, she sometimes damages them on purpose, even cutting off buttons and hiding them in her pocket. Yet Caroline never scolds her, only reminding her gently to be more careful next time, though Caroline can be stubborn at times. She treats the people around her with unusual kindness, so they never truly fear her. As Christmas approaches, Caroline decides to hold a grand dinner party, inviting the most important guests in town to find a suitable wife for her brother. She demands Irish linen tablecloths and wants 100 beeswax candles hanging on the walls. But when she learns that the steward has added an extra charge on top of the candle price, she becomes furious and slaps him in anger. That single slap plants resentment deep in his heart, seeking revenge. The steward and a few others secretly sabotage the preparations, cutting Caroline's dress, replacing the fine tablecloths with dirty sheets, and swapping the candles for cheap ones. The grand dinner is soon filled with a terrible smell, as if the place had turned into a slaughterhouse, and Caroline loses all her dignity in front of the noble ladies. When the banquet begins, Caroline's brother John stands up to give a speech, thanking everyone for attending while also mentioning that the situation has become increasingly tense. More and people from Britain have begun to support the end of slavery. Meanwhile, outside the plantation, the workers are joyfully celebrating Christmas. The steward quietly tells July to sneak out some wine, and July tiptoes to the window, handing the bottle to those celebrating outside. But that small act is caught by one of the guests sitting near the table. The man immediately calls July over and searches her, discovering the hidden bottle behind her back, making July's heart pound with fear. Just then, several soldiers rushed into the room and report that chaos has broken out outside. The fields have been burned, and several landowners have been attacked. The guests instantly drop their utensils and grab their weapons, ready to fight back. Seeing this, July quickly comes up with an idea. She tells Caroline that the estate will soon be under attack and that she should leave as soon as possible. Kind-hearted Caroline is terrified, hastily packing her things while muttering about how her brother could have left her alone in such danger as Caroline rushes out. July 6th. Feels a wave of satisfaction, realizing that the house will finally be hers. The moment Caroline leaves, July reveals her true self. She sprays on Caroline's most expensive perfume, puts on the most elegant dress, and sits proudly in front of the mirror as if she were the true lady of the house. Not stopping there, she brings in her beloved man, Nimrod, and spends the night with him in Caroline's bed without hesitation, but the next morning, the sudden sound of carriage wheels breaks the silence. Life freezes, realizing Caroline has returned, and hurriedly wakes Nimrod in a panic. The two of them crawl under the bed to hide at the same time. Caroline is arguing bitterly with her brother John. She accuses him of abandoning her the night before while John coldly pushes her out of the room. It turns out that during the previous night's chaos, John had personally taken lives, and the guilt has been tearing him apart. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, John takes out his pistol from the desk and ends his own life. Hearing the gunshot, Caroline rushes back in, only to find her brother lying motionless on the floor. The sight shocks her completely, leaving her paralyzed in fear, under the bed. Sheila trembles uncontrollably and a small noise escapes her lips. The overseer, hearing the sound, immediately bends down and drags Nimrod out. In panic, Caroline points at Nimrod, accusing him of being responsible for her brother's death. At that time, taking one's own life was considered a crime, and someone had to take the blame for John's death. Caroline believes that if no one confesses, she herself will have to bear all the consequences. The overseer then decides to execute Nimrod on the spot. Even as Nimrod pleads that he is innocent at the critical moment, July bursts out from under the bed, knocking down the overseer and escaping with Nimrod. They flee to a distant plantation, but the people there soon recognize July. It turns out this is the very place where she was taken away from her mother years ago. When July's mother hears the news, she runs with all her strength to see the daughter she has missed for so long, but the guards are already closing in. Nimrod is captured and killed on the spot, leaving July in despair, waiting helplessly for what's to come, but at the last moment her mother arrives and in one final act of courage she strikes down the overseer, saving her daughter. July watches her mother's figure fade into the distance, tears streaming down her face, but before they exchange more than a few words, the pursuers arrive without hesitation. Her mother tells July to run and promises to hold them off. It doesn't take long before she is captured. The uprising is soon crushed, and countless people are punished, with July's mother among those sentenced to death. July watches in agony as her mother is taken away, her heart breaking as she closes her eyes in despair. Months later, amid waves of pain and a newborn's cries, July gives birth to a healthy baby boy, yet she feels no attachment to him, refusing even to let him carry his father Nimrod's name. Wanting to give her son a chance at freedom, July quietly places him at the doorstep of a convent, only leaving after she sees a nun pick him up. From then on, she loses all hope, spending her days working silently in the fields. One day, a carriage stops nearby. It's Caroline. Since losing her family, Caroline has lived in loneliness and helplessness, unsure whom to rely on. She decides to bring July back to her, asking her to help with laundry, cooking, and to keep her company. A year later, a new overseer named Robert arrives at the farm. The moment Caroline meets him, she finds herself drawn to him. Robert's mission is to bring freedom to the workers, announcing that everyone will now be free and no longer bound to the estate. From now on, they can choose to stay and work, paying rent to the landowner each month, but when the people hear, they must still pay rent. They grow angry and walk away, leaving Robert at a loss. Though his reform meets resistance, Caroline is fascinated by his determination and begins to show her affection even on a stormy night. She sends July through the rain to deliver a message, inviting Robert to dine with her, but July has her own plan in mind. Longing to escape her lowly position, she decides to use this opportunity to change her fate. That day, July skillfully manages to ride in Robert's carriage. As they near their destination, she asks him whether he owns any books about England. She says she wants to learn more about the country and casually mentions that she heard his father was from there. Robert smiles and agrees, saying he has one such book and can lend it to her later. Hearing this, July secretly rejoices at that moment. Caroline, watching from the window, feels a surge of jealousy, furious. She orders July to wash and mend all her clothes at once, but instead, July seizes the chance to wear Caroline's dress, carefully fixing her hair with a scarf, freshening herself up and heading straight to Robert's room. Robert welcomes her and brings out the promised book about England, but July's true intention is not to read. She slowly moves closer to him, her eyes filled with emotion. Robert eventually gives in to temptation, and July's plan succeeds just as she hoped. Later, as July returns from the laundry, Robert pulls her aside into the woods. He confesses his feelings and tells her he has a plan that could solve the problem between them when they leave the woods. July wears a faint, contented smile, but upon returning to the house, Caroline calls her over in excitement, saying there's so much to do. She must go to the tailor for her wedding dress, prepare invitations, and the cake because she is about to marry Robert. July's smile freezes instantly, realizing how foolish her dream has been. The wedding preparations continue busily. Everything moving forward is planned, but on the wedding night, instead of staying with Caroline, Robert quietly knocks on July's door. "What are you doing here?" The next morning, July hurries downstairs to prepare breakfast and sees Caroline sitting silently on the bed, her face pale. Gut floods through July's heart, and she can hardly look Caroline in the eyes. Robert, however, returns to his room without offering any explanation, as if nothing had happened. In truth, Robert married Caroline not out of love, but to meet his family's expectations and to gain the position of plantation owner. Their marriage, empty in spirit, became the perfect cover for his secret affair with July. As days passed, Robert and July grew bolder in their relationship, even sharing dinners together without shame. Months later, July gave birth to Robert's daughter. The midwife was surprised to see such a fair-skinned baby, and Robert named her Emily. From then on, the three of them lived together as if nothing was wrong, enjoying what they believed to be happiness, ignoring the whispers around them, but trouble was already brewing. The workers on the plantation had long suffered under the overseer's cruelty and finally decided to rise up. They shouted that they were no longer enslaved people and demanded to be treated with respect. Many had believed Robert would be different, a man ahead of his time, but deep down he had never seen them as equals, though he had announced freedom for all. The overseers still carried their whips, and nothing had truly changed. When Robert realized that the sugarcane fields were nearly abandoned and the harvest season was slipping away, he began to panic. He learned from the overseer that most workers had stopped showing up, so he ordered them to gather everyone and work day and night to finish the harvest, but the workers refused, saying they would rest for Christmas no matter what. Desperate, Robert offered double pay, but even then they made excuses and walked away, feeling humiliated and angry. Robert regretted ever granting them freedom and stormed off in frustration. As the days passed, the ripe sugar cane began to rot in the fields, threatening to ruin the plant. The next day, Robert tried to force the workers back by raising the rent on their homes. He ordered notices to be posted across the estate, but he underestimated their determination. Upon seeing the announcement, the workers tore it down and confronted Robert directly, declaring they would neither work nor pay rent ever again. Robert tried to reason with them, but they refused to listen. They believed that if they all stood together, the landowners would have no choice but to yield, but they had forgotten the harsh truth of who still held power. Enraged, Robert decided to make an example. He and his men destroyed the crops and slaughtered the animals to show who truly owned the land. Watching their food and fields destroyed, the workers fell to their knees, crying in despair for the first time. Meanwhile, July was filled with fear and confusion, torn between worry for her people and fear for Robert's safety. At that moment, Caroline came to her in tears, saying she feared for her husband's life and begged July to stay with her. July refused, claiming she needed to look after her child, but when Caroline saw the baby in July's arms, she froze. The child's skin was pale, unlike the others, and a terrible realization began to dawn in her mind. Just then, Robert returned, proudly declaring that the workers had surrendered and promised to return to work. Caroline noticed he was injured and quickly told July to bring water, which July reluctantly did that night for the first time in a long while. Robert stayed in Caroline's room, but the next morning, not a single worker appeared in the fields, realizing he had been deceived again. Robert's fury exploded. He grabbed a sickle and stormed into the cane fields alone, determined to do the work himself, but thousands of acres were impossible for one man to handle. When July saw him struggling, she tried to calm him, but Robert, filled with anger and resentment, lashed out at anyone who came near. Fortunately, Caroline arrived just in time to pull July away from danger. Eventually, Robert down, but July could feel he was no longer the same man she once knew. Soon after, the workers abandoned the plantation completely, seeking true freedom elsewhere with no one left to tend the land. The sugar cane rotted and Robert fell ill from stress and exhaustion. Caroline forbade anyone from visiting him, especially July, believing it was the workers in July's influence that had ruined her husband, but Robert only wanted to see his daughter Emily. Caroline promised July that if Robert wished to see her, she would make arrangements relieved. July agreed to let Caroline take care of Emily. In truth, Caroline had already learned of Robert and July's secret relationship. Though heartbroken, she loved her husband too deeply to expose the truths. For days, Caroline stayed by Robert's side, caring for him without rest while July could only watch from a distance. Robert never once asked to see her again. When his health improved, he and Caroline decided to leave the island and return to England since the day he hurt. July in the cane fields. Robert had never spoken to her. Now the only thing that brought July comfort was her daughter Emily. Before departing, Robert warned the servants never to let July near them again, and from his cold gaze, it seemed he had already made up his mind. July could only watch as they rode away. Caroline casting her a victorious look that cut deep into her heart. At that moment, a maid approached and told July she had just brought fresh milk, asking if she could take Emily to feed her without thinking. July handed her the baby, but by the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. The maid carried Emily to the dock and boarded the same ship as Robert and Caroline. July stood frozen, realizing she had fallen into their trap, losing her second child just as she had lost the first. Her first baby had been left at a convent's doorstep, and now her second was taken away forever. Her world collapsed completely. Later, July collapsed on the road and was rescued by a group of her people who took her in. But soon after, drought and illness struck, forcing her back into the wilderness, surviving only through begging. One day as she sat on the roadside, a well-dressed man approached her and kindly invited her to his home for a meal. July thought to herself, I have nothing left. What more could I lose? It's been days since I'd eaten, so she agreed. During the meal, the man finally revealed the truth. He said, I am the child you left at the convent all those years ago. July froze in shock. Her eyes wide with disbelief, the man explained that he had grown up in England, received an education, and started working as an apprentice at 12. Through determination and hard work, he had built a successful life, and after years of searching, he had finally found his mother. That day marked the end of July's years of wandering. Her son later recorded her story, and the film we've just watched is based on that very tale adapted from the novel The Long Song. Like and subscribe for more interesting movie like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.